Thank you for staying tuned. Nigeria no doubt faces a critical infrastructure deficit projected at more than $3 trillion in the next 26 years, with an average annual budget of approximately $29 billion in the last 10 years, of which the figure only about 30% was allocated to capital expenditure. Recall that President Muhammadu Buhari on January 25, 2019 signed the Road Infrastructure Development and Refurbishment Investment Tax Credit Scheme 2019 to combat this shortfalls. The scheme is to enable the federal government to leverage private sector capital and efficiency for the construction, refurbishment, and maintenance of critical road infrastructure in key economic areas in the country. And only last week, the NNPC Limited revealed that it will fix more federal roads across the country with an additional 1 trillion naira under the federal government road infrastructure tax credit scheme. Let's put this into perspective and understand what this means. My guest is the president of the Association of Capital Markets Academics of Nigeria, and is a professor of capital markets, Professor Uche Uwaleke. Prof, thank you so much for your time. It's good to see you.
So much, Tolu. My pleasure being here.
Prof, clearly you know I'm going to start with the inflation figures that just came up from the MBS. I really would like your views. What were you expecting? Because yes, that's the truth. And on the other side, today is also the takeoff of the new Naira notes. Banks will start to give to customers over the counter. Two big stories in the world of business. I really need to have your views around this, Prof.
Thank you, Tolu. Beginning with inflation rate, because that was expected, that the numbers will, climb again. Although this time from 21.09 to 21.47. We also noticed the pressure is still on food. Food inflation has now gone above 24%. The highest. Lowest rate coming from Kaduna State at slightly above 19%. So it was expected. I'm sure the markets, have expected that inflation rate, will continue to rise against the backdrop of still external influences. The Russia-Ukraine war, continues to, have negative impact on global economy. Even in the U.S., just as I'm sure you know, yesterday the Federal Open Market Committee of the Federal Reserve, also increased the Fed fund rates by 50 basis points, again in a bid to, curb inflation. So it's something we find all across the globe. Even in Ghana, I'm sure you saw the recent figure from Ghana. Ghana's inflation rate now above 50%. So it was expected. There's no doubt about that. With respect to the currency redesign, it's something I've always said is a welcome development for us here. And I'm glad that the new notes, will be out, from today. And I'm also glad to note that the cash withdrawal limits, which is part of the entire package. I say it's part of the entire package because I see the two as mutually dependent. That is not going to take effect this festive season because it will end up disrupting a lot of activities, but it will take effect from 9th of January. That's talking about the cash withdrawal limit. But the new notes are welcome. I want to believe that if well implemented, the bulk of the money that is circulating outside the banking sector will eventually be brought in, with the associated, benefits and advantages, that will come with it, increasing financial inclusion, and more importantly, enabling the central bank to have a handle on money supply, and by extension, to be in a position to also implement, monetary policy. So I think they are all welcome developments.
Thank you so much, Prof. It's a good way to start our conversation.
And the cash withdrawal limits.
Okay, Prof, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. It's a good way to start our conversation. Now, we are talking about unlocking the tax credit that's for infrastructure financing. Now, that's what I want us to talk about. What's your take with regards to government's move at infrastructure? We've talked about this before now, but with focus on this tax credit scheme, we see companies taking advantage of this.
Tolu is a good one. It's one of the innovative funding schemes that this country yearns for. You know where our state of infrastructure is. The stock of infrastructure is still low vis-a-vis other countries, particularly peer countries. Before now, it used to be under 30%, stock of infrastructure to GDP. But in the last few years, it's been ramped up to about 35% to GDP. If you compare that with South Africa, for example, where stock of infrastructure to GDP is as high as 85%, you'll agree with me that we still have a long way to go. But some progress has been made, no doubt, in the last few years. No doubt, thanks to the investment tax credit. Again, just as you rightly pointed out, in order to incentivize the private sector, to help out, because it's not something the government can do alone. The deficit is huge, over 3 trillion. And going by what is put out there in the infrastructure, the master plan, we need to pump in $100 billion, not naira, on an annual basis for the next 30 years to be able to bridge that infrastructure gap. That is not what the government, alone can do, and that is why the private sector, is needed. And of course, we can't overstress the importance of infrastructure to development, economic development. Part of why we have this high inflation rate today in this country is because of a weak infrastructure. Look at what happened in recent times. Because of the flooding we had and the roads became impassable, that affected the transportation of petroleum products. So fuel prices went up, and we have seen the consequence of fuel price going up. So high energy costs generally tend to pass through, have this pass through to domestic food prices. So weak infrastructure is contributing to inflation. There's no doubt. Weak infrastructure is contributing to high unemployment rate, and is also feeding into the high poverty rates we have in this country. So when we talk about multidimensional poverty index, whether with respect to health, education, or living standards, you cannot remove the place of or the role being played by infrastructure in all this. So there's no doubt about that. We need to ramp up stock of infrastructure, particularly roads and rails. And that is where where I commend the executive order that was signed by the president in 2019, named the Infrastructure Development and Refurbishment Investment Tax Credit Scheme, which is a 10-year scheme that allows participants or companies to fund some infrastructure projects, and in exchange, get a credit against the company's income tax, they are expected to pay. So for me, that's a very good, innovation with respect to funding infrastructure. As I said earlier on, the government alone, cannot do that. And since 2019, a number of companies have showed interest, in being participants. Notable among them is Dangote Cement. Dangote Cement, I recall, handled the Obajana, Kaba, Lokoja axis under the scheme. MTN is also the one handling Enugu Onisha Expressway. Another company, LLNG, has also been involved in roads and bridges in the Bonny area. And now we have also seen an NNPC Limited being involved in taking advantage of this investment tax credit scheme. So on the part of the government and the company, is a win-win thing. The company is getting, tax credits. And remember too, the companies are allowed to even carry forward this unutilized tax credits until it is fully utilized, at least over the next 10 years. So for companies, it's good. And on the part of the government too, it's a big relief because the private sector now is assisting to do these roads. This is a model that also gray areas. There are areas that will require being smoothened out. One of those areas, has to do with the criteria for selecting these roads, road projects. Of course, the Executive Order 007 says the approval of the roads must be, is done by the President on the recommendation of the Minister, of Finance. But again, bear in mind that these companies are getting a credit against companies' income tax. And companies' income tax for large companies is, as 30%, and the proceeds go into the federation account. The proceeds are meant to be shared by the 3 tiers of government, federal, states, and local governments. So if the federation account is deprived or denied of these proceeds, it goes without saying. It stands to reason that any investment tax credit should also benefit the 3 tiers of government. But when the roads involved are only federal roads, it will appear that states and local governments are not benefiting from it. So the criteria for selecting these roads is also something of concern.
Yes, Prof, allow me to interject here now, Prof. Prof,
as I said,
can you hear me?
Are also beneficiaries of CIT.
Prof, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I just want to interject before you because that was my next line of thoughts. What kind of roads should be selected when have opportunities like this or initiatives like this? Some would say they must be economically viable roads. Those are roads that should get into or get the advantage of initiatives like this. What do you make of that?
Yes, as I said, they must not be restricted to federal roads, Tolu, because the tax credit is in relation to companies' income tax. And companies' income tax is expected to benefit the 3 tiers of government. So if you restrict it to federal roads, it will appear as though you're shutting out the other tiers of government. So subnationals will also be interested in benefiting one way or the other from the scheme. And that is why I said one issue that is still knotty is the criteria for selecting the road projects. The other two is to ensure that the states and local government subnationals are also carried along and are also part of this. There are also issues around dispute resolution mechanisms, which of course are bound to arise. For example, how do you go about the evaluation of the roads in terms of the project cost? Who determines the project costs? Because the project costs will, of course, be part of the determinants of even the tax credits to be enjoyed. Okay? So these are some of the things I think should be factored in. But whether they should be purely economic routes, of course, there are other models of financing road projects. Apart from explore these other models. One of which is securitization. I've always advocated that government can also securitize any revenue streams arising from, say, a road project. If you have an economic road, a road that a better alternative to financing that road, in my view, should be securitization. Because if the road is economically viable, you can securitize, for example, you can securitize the toll revenue on the road over a period of time, using a special purpose vehicle to issue securities, that process, of course, will be used to finance the road. So there is securitization, again, as an option. Investment tax credit is another innovative option. And infrastructure financing, the way we have gone about it, I think we need to tweak it, in favor of these innovative models, in favor of getting the private sector, and even when government is issuing bonds to be able to finance infrastructure, in this country. I think the instruments we use to raise the bond is also important. We don't just issue, bonds, general obligation bonds, the way we have been doing, with a view to financing they use, bonds that are, a good example is Sukuk. Sukuk is a good example of a bond, an instrument that we can use to finance a road project. And the government too, of course, has recognized that, and in recent times, appear to be increasing the size of the Sukuk they have been issuing. So far, I think we've done between 600 billion and 700 billion naira worth of Sukuk, but that's not enough. That's still small, given the scale of the deficit we are talking about. Now, if you look at our domestic debt profile, you check them, if you disaggregate them by instrument, you realize that FGM bond is accounting for over 72% of that, of the entire portfolio, domestic debt portfolio, whereas the infrastructure bond instruments there, namely Sukuk and green bonds, account for just a little under 3%. So that's not enough. That's very, very significant if we must drive infrastructure in this country. Elsewhere, you hear of railway bond. In Kenya, for example, they finance their railway using railway bonds. In South Africa too, the Transnet, the South African railway company, also issues railway bonds. So when you issue railway bond, of course, to do that, you need to restructure the entire system to be able to have the confidence of both domestic and international investors. Okay, when you issue railway bonds, proceeds are used to finance railway. When you issue roads bonds, like Sukuk, they are used to finance roads. These are the kinds of borrowing we should be doing, given the fact that this country is already heavily heavily indebted, more or less. So we should now borrow and tie to projects, especially when those projects are viable ones. So even.
Okay, Prof, we're running out of time and also having little challenges with the network, but let's wrap up on this note. You've commended this initiative and other initiatives being instituted by the, of course, Buhari-led administration to address infrastructure challenge. I know you're not a politician, but how would you rate its performance with regards to infrastructure? Just today, the second Niger Bridge has also been opened to traffic, and a lot of commendations coming all the way.
Yes, I want to invite others to say yes, some progress has, yes. I started by saying we've made some progress in the last few years. Stock of infrastructure GDP used to be under 30%. Today is close to 35%. So there's no doubt about that. Some progress, has been made. Whether you're looking at the airports or you're looking at the road infrastructure or rail infrastructure, yes, you could say, to be fair, we have made some progress. I'm happy to note that the second Niger Bridge is being opened today. Of course, the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, Sovereign Wealth Fund, played a lot of role there. By the way, the Sovereign Wealth Fund has a component that is for infrastructure, okay, and that's also why I've always advocated that we should also give attention to that fund, and as much as possible, anytime we'll have windfall, or anything like windfall. We shouldn't share everything. Part of it should be also, kept aside, also invested in the sovereign wealth fund. So that is the way to go. So I want to say yes, we've made progress, but of course, we need to, do more in the area of innovative infrastructure financing.
Thank you so much for this conversation there. I've been speaking to Professor Uche Uwaleke there, speaking extensively on all initiatives being put in place to address infrastructure challenge which we face. It's worrisome, $3 trillion, a lot of money there, but at least we've started that move, and it seems to look like a very positive one. Thank you so much, Prof, for your time, Professor of Capital Market and President of the Association of Capital Market Academics of Nigeria. Do enjoy the rest of your day.